This video is sponsored by Skillshare. For 2.5 weeks, Don and I have been taking care of a stray puppy that we found on Christmas and looking for the best forever home for her by posting on a rescue site as well as through my social media channels. Once the inquiries started coming in, I knew I didn't have a lot of time left, so while she was still with us, I got to work on a dog bowl stand to give away as a goodbye present, and hopefully it's one that she'll be able to grow into. From the way that she looks and 90% of the comments and feedback I've received, this girl is either 100% Mastiff or a mix with some Mastiff genetics. And if that's the case, there's a good chance that this puppy is gonna grow into a big dog. Everything I looked up showed that Mastiffs grow to be about 100 pounds, and I didn't want to make something that she'd outgrow so quickly. I did some research on dog bowl designs and the best heights to make them at for adult Mastiffs, and eventually I narrowed it down to making a minimalist, practical, and timeless look. I did think about giving this piece a much artsier design, but because I didn't know whose home it was gonna go into, I didn't want to get too crazy and end up making something that stuck out too much or go completely unappreciated. The 3D modeling program that I'm using to create the design is called Rhino, and truth be told, I have always been a little embarrassed about my 3D modeling skills. Don't get me wrong, I can handle my own, but things that might take a more experienced user a couple seconds might take me about a half an hour or more to do or figure out. So for the past few weeks, I have made a commitment to improve on my Rhino skills, which will ultimately level up my creativity by using Skillshare. Skillshare is the world's largest online learning community with thousands of classes. But I have to admit, when I first heard of Skillshare, I wasn't really sure that there'd be anything I could learn from it. But not only was I surprised to see that they even had Rhino classes, after taking some time to browse around their selection, I saw classes about video creation, design, side hustles, and so much more. The specific Rhino class that I'm currently taking is called Zero to Hero by Wasif Debussy. I hope I pronounced that right. And in a short amount of time, I have already begun to learn so much from it that will make my workflow a lot faster. No matter what your craft is, I have become more than confident that you'll be able to find a class that can help you improve and level up your game. So if you're interested to see what they got, I have a link in my description box that gets the first 500 people an entire month for free. Thank you, Skillshare, for sharing this link with my viewers and sponsoring this video. The material that I'm going to be using on this build is ash that has been salvaged from a furniture, and how I got this material was back when I was still in Chicago. A student I knew had an unfinished furniture project that he decided to leave behind when he was moving out. I offered to rescue it and broke it down into usable pieces. Fast forward years to today, while I was looking through my glorious stash of lumber in the living room, I remembered that story and chose them for this project because of that. With all of the pieces cleaned up, I began to cut them to their final length and angles, and pretty soon, I realized that I messed up all of them. Basically, I switched the face and sides of all my cuts, making the sides too thin and the faces too thick. Most of the cuts would have been okay, but the stretcher that I already cut out for it was gonna be too short. I went back into Rhino to redo the design to work with all the new dimensions, came up with this, and because the stretcher piece that I originally cut out was now unusable for this project, I joined and planed a fresh new piece and moved onwards to a dry assembly. Because I modified the design, the height of the stand had to be a little bit shorter to make everything work. Instead of trimming the pieces individually and trying to set up a bunch of angle cuts, I figured that keeping the piece in a dry assembly state and cutting them with a crosscut sled would be the easiest and simplest method. Once I got that squared away, I added dado cuts to the front and hind legs because a stretcher would be put there to connect them. If you notice, I did decide to use the Festool table saw for this part because if I was gonna do this step on the saw stop, I would have wanted to change out the blade to a flat tooth blade, and Since that same blade wouldn't have worked for the angled dado cut that I needed, I thought, why go through all of that when I had a table saw available with a snazzy sliding table feature? Could I get all of this done on the saw stop? Yes, I could. But is it more fun on a sliding table saw? Yes, it is. So, Festool it was. I gave all the pieces a nice sand and then started gluing it all together. Once the glue was dry, I gave the legs a good sand and then started to work on the stretcher that'll connect the legs together. If you remember from earlier, this was a piece that I needed to make a brand new one of, and to join them together, I will be using my all-time trusty favorite, the domino. Now, one thing that I want to point out about my design is that I gave the front legs a little bit of splay. From my own observation of the puppy, I saw that from time to time, she tends to get a little too excited about food and sometimes puts her paws onto or even into her bowl. I don't think it'll keep happening, but just in case, I didn't want to design the legs to be straight up and down because I figured that if it didn't have enough weight, the entire stand could tip. With a 13-degree splay, that should be enough to handle her putting her paws on there or deciding to go all out crazy and jumping on it to get a rub on. And of course, while my confidence was starting to grow, I began to round over a bunch of the edges, and despite marking all the areas that I did not want to round over, I ended up rounding over one of them anyways. This time, the part I messed up was where the stretchers of the legs met the stretcher between the legs, or the cross stretcher. And as you can imagine, because my mess up was again revolving a stretcher, I was feeling kind of annoyed by it. But what can you do? At the very least, I will have to say that messing up the same mistake isn't as annoying as reteaching the same command to a puppy. The little girl we were watching over loves to gobble up acorns, rocks, poops, foam, plastic, and other random things she finds on the ground, and it felt like a daily chore to retrain her to leave things alone. With furniture, I just gotta make it right once, and it'll stay that way forever. I went ahead and ran the cross stretcher through the planer, which will make it a little thinner, and then, after rounding it over and giving it a good sand, I glued the legs together. As you can see, for the top of the dog bowl stand, I'm currently working with a panel that was already put together because I think it was previously the side of that cabinet. I cut it to the size I needed, sanded it, and then started cutting the angles. I gave the top a 15-degree tilt because I noticed that whenever I fed her by holding the bowl to her, having a tilt seemed to give her a little more leverage. When the bowl was completely flat, I saw that she would first angle her head almost 90 degrees and then push her food to an edge where she'd scoop the food out by licking the food against the walls. But with a small tilt, not only will she not have to tilt her head downward so much, but unless she starts to slobber significantly more in the future, she should theoretically have a much easier time to mop that bowl clean. I believe this is the moment where I should declare that I am by no means a dog scientist. I'm a woodworker, and I'm just designing and doing what I thought would be helpful and nice for the puppy. After getting all the cuts that I needed, I prepared the top and legs for some good old domino joinery and then started to prepare it for some shaper action. And here is where I goofed up again. For some reason, I keep forgetting that the shaper reads the tape in front of the machine, not directly under it. And because of that, I wasted a lot of tape, sticking more and more of it on there, wondering why the heck it wasn't working. Duh. But once I refigured that little thing out, the holes were successfully cut, and after sanding all the edges, rounding over them, sanding some of the feet, and cutting the dominoes a little bit shorter, I went ahead and glued the top to the legs. On the very next day, Don was looking at the bowl stand and said, I looked at him and said, "What?" And his response to me was, "I really think the bowl stand is too tall. She's probably going to have to jump onto it to eat. I was a bit annoyed to hear him say that, and at first responded with, "Nuh-uh," because I was sure that I took every precaution to figure out the measurements. In order to settle the debate once and for all, I took the dog bowl stand inside and had the puppy do a test run. And yep, he was right. The thing was, I was right too. I never designed it for her current size to begin with, but rather her future full size. But then that left me a very important problem to solve. What's the future owner supposed to do with a dog bowl stand that was too tall for the puppy right now? Wait for her to grow and then use it? Additionally, the extra bit of space I made between the bowl and the edge of the stand makes it harder for her to reach as a puppy. After thinking through a couple potential solutions like cutting the leg shorter, which I only had about an inch or inch and a quarter of playroom, I came up with the idea of making a temporary platform for her. One that she can use for now, and when she gets older, the platform can be taken away and done with however they see fit. Back in the garage, the first thing I did was clean up all the excess glue and then shaved off the tiny excess I left on the top. After sanding it smooth, I took a hand planer to shave it down a little more because that edge was where the puppy's neck was going to be, and I wanted it to be as smooth as possible. After sanding and rounding over any of the remaining edges, I then moved on to what was originally supposed to be my final step. For the finish, I'm using polyacrylic because once polyacrylic is fully cured, it won't be toxic and should be durable enough to stand up to all the splashing I imagine she'll do when she's older. Because even now, as a puppy, she is making a mess. The second reason I chose polyacrylic is because of the tone it'll give to ash. Because ash is pretty pale wood, if I were to use an oil-based finish, it'll give it a really yellow tint, and I typically try to avoid that yellowy hue at all costs, because I don't like it. I applied a total of 3 coats with a light sand in between each using 400 grit sandpaper, and in between each of the coats, I was also working on the platform. Because the platform is essentially a part that'll be discarded, I didn't want to put too much effort into it. It needs to work, it needs to be easy to move around, and then it can be used however the user sees fit. What I basically ended up making was an upside down open box with some handles cut out, and in all honesty, this was probably one of the fastest boxes I'd ever built. To join the pieces together, I not only used wood glue, but also a nail gun. The nail gun is an item that I rarely use, but just to make the process quicker, I busted it out for this. I left the bottom open so it could save on weight, and so it can potentially be used as a basket to hold something else later on. And for the handles, I laser cut a template and used a router to cut out the holes. I still gave the box a good sanding session and rounded over all the corners so that no one can get a wood cut. Because if you got one before, it feels terrible. And after all was said and done, voila.
Come. Here. Good. Yes. Yes. Up.
Come.
Yes. Good job.
Yes.
Come.
Finished it? Yeah, we finished your food.
That was my very first official sponsorship that I've ever done. And whoa, that was both exciting and very difficult to do. Doing the sponsorship wasn't what was hard, but trying to get it done while taking care of a puppy was, crazy. To all the moms and dads out there, I salute you. Even though it was a relatively simple build, making the dog bowl stand was a lot of fun and really fulfilling because at the end of the day, I'm able to feel like I've done my absolute best to show her love in every way. Food, water, pets, cuddles, bath, walks, attention, and now my craft. Which does bring me to my next subject, which is one of my biggest goals for 2025, and that's to work on way more projects that will showcase more of my artistic side. I don't know what they'll be, but I know that the entirety of 2024 and this puppy has kind of given me that time and space to reignite that fire. Last but not least, big shout out to my Patreon crew. Thank you all for supporting me and Dawn's YouTube and content creation journey. As you can see, it's because of your support that we can keep working on improving our videos, and look where that's got us. Our very first sponsorship. Dawn and I appreciate every single one of you, and if you're also interested in supporting my journey for as little as a cup of coffee a month, do consider Patreon as an option to help us continue to make these videos for you. Thank you again, and peace out.